Well, good afternoon, everyone. Darren Saul here, your host of Playing with Perspective, the Suspended Animation Podcast. Hope everybody's doing really well. It's episode 139, and I have the fantastic Janie Jordan here in the house. How are you, Janie?
Hi there, and congratulations on 139. That's
Definitely, thank you.
very, very impressive. And I love the name of Perspectives because it is all about perspective, isn't it?
These days, I'm learning more and more how important perspective is. Absolutely. So for all the audience out there, we've got a great show. We're going to be talking about how to avoid blood on the floor in a crisis. Janie Jordan is a reputation risk expert with over 30 years experience in crisis management, advising and coaching spokespeople on how to deliver a powerful, meaningful message in the media. A former journalist and award-winning PR practitioner, Janie has worked globally with some of the biggest names in the business, including GE. She's the author of the highly acclaimed The 4 Highly Effective Stages of Crisis Management, and is a regular speaker at global conferences. She is in the process of building an online course on reputation risk and also rewriting her book. Ritualistic sacrifice is an inevitable stage in a crisis, and in this podcast, Janie will share tips and techniques in how to avoid being scarified. So Janie, this is going to be great stuff. I'm scared already.
And you know, I'm picking up on that word scary. You're scared already. Let me tell you, one of the workshops I was leading for emerging leaders, you know, the next gen of leadership in a lot of owner businesses, family businesses.
Yep.
And he was, a millennial. And we were talking about crisis management and how to prepare and what it means. And he looked at me and I said, so how's everybody feeling right now? And he looked at me and went, it's shit scary. It's shit scary. And you've asked me, a lot of people ask me, what stops organizations from actually putting together a crisis management plan? Mm-hmm. And the very sad fact is 75% of all those scary moments could be avoided.
Really? 75%, as much as that?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, wow, indeed. And it's actually a falsehood, an absolute myth to think it won't happen to you if you're a small business. I'm here to tell you not only it can, it will, because we live, let's just stop and think about the world we live in, right? It's a VUCA world. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, it's ambiguous. I mean, it's, if you like, it's volatile and steroids, thanks to the pandemic. Part of that volatility has left the White House, thank goodness for that. However, that's another story, right? So we're living in a VUCA world. So that's volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. We're also living in a 24/7 news cycle.
Yeah.
Where social media, i.e. Facebook, Twitter, are as much part of the media as, say, the Financial Review, the 7:30 Report.
Absolutely.
Or the Daily Telegraph, Sydney Morning Herald, The Age, any of the talkback radio. So when you talk about the media today, and then, of course, there are all the local, you know, there's the Web Courier in Sydney, and, you know, my community,
and all sorts
magazines, absolutely, and peer-to-peer magazines. And then, like in my community up here in the Upper Hunter Valley, we have a news site that operates like a tabloid newspaper, right on the heels of breaking news. We have a very, very active community website. So if something big's happening, it will be there. And sometimes it will be there before you know, or your wider stakeholder group will know. So that's the reality. So you're a small business. If something goes wrong, you're accused of racism, let's just say. Mm-hmm. That will go spread like wildfire because it's something that is no longer socially acceptable at any level, never was, but it's definitely not now. So small businesses need to be planning and thinking about what could go wrong for them and having a basic plan in place. That's why we prepare. Otherwise, we literally run around like chooks with our heads cut off.
My God, I mean, it seems so important, obviously, but you know, we're so busy running our businesses and running our lives, and that's so time consuming and so takes so much effort. We've even got to put into place another plan of attack just in case something happens.
But you see, that's a myth too. If you think about it, oh, that's something else I have to do. Oh, that's another plan that has you written.
Yep.
Rather than having a culture that's crisis ready. The modern way of thinking about this is it's a collaborative. You're doing this in partnership with your suppliers, your dedicated suppliers, your referral partners, your key stakeholders. So you all have a shared interest in preventing the unthinkable happening. So if you just take a small example as like a culture of a small or medium-sized business, if everybody is looking out for one another, overhearing a mate's, making a disparaging remark about a First Nations person, a woman, a person with disability, then that's a risk. So you can be crisis ready if you change culture and go, that's unacceptable here.
Gotcha.
And so you're actually, which means ultimately the ultimate modern organization anybody in that organization can declare a crisis because everybody understands the expectations, the behavioral outcomes, and will cling to the values because they're lived.
True. Totally, I agree with you. And it's all about the common purpose and the common culture and the common philosophy. And if we live that with truth, we should always be prepared for any potential crisis, and we probably won't get into anything because we're all, on the right path.
Absolutely. Now that's the ideal, isn't it? And unfortunately, human beings are imperfect, aren't they, Darren? We're imperfect. So therefore, we're going to muck up. We're going to stuff up along the way. And we'll make assumptions. I mean, I'm trained in this, and I made an assumption that actually didn't cause a crisis, but it could have easily, unless I'd asked a follow-up, why? What do you actually mean? So it's actually part of being really understanding reputation risk and avoiding blood on the floor is actually courage. It's called courage to speak up, and it's called courage to question and courage to ask that why and why again. And if you actually give yourself permission to take that step up and even ask the why of your leader, your boss, and go, can you please help me explain? Or I seem to have offended you. Can you tell me more about what's happening right now? Rather than going, oh my God, this is scary. I don't know what to do. So that's the modern way. And that's the way that society actually wants us to behave now. That's what research after research after research says. Be authentic.
Yeah. And in other words, communicate. Just communicate.
Yes. Now let's unpack. Absolutely. Well, it's simple and complex, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because communication, everybody communicates. We can't stop ourselves from communicating. So let's unpack that. Communication is intrinsic to crisis management. Communication is intrinsic to business and success or failure. And let's not get down the personal route, but just talk about business for a moment.
Definitely.
Yet, so few people do it well.
Yep, I agree.
Most people talk in jargon. Most people will talk too long.
Yep.
And fail to bring alive their communication with either authenticity or anecdotal evidence.
Yep.
Now, in a crisis, you've got to communicate very effectively and very quickly. You've got to communicate the decisive actions you've taken.
And you've got to be clear about your message. You can't dance around and play behind words.
Well, absolutely. The golden rule is take responsibility and act fast.
Yep.
Number one golden rule. And act fast, what does that mean? It means today, if something bad is in the public domain, and we discussed earlier, it could be Facebook, a blog, a radio, it could be anywhere today. If something bad is in the public domain, you have 15 minutes only.
That's it.
To respond. Otherwise,
15 minutes.
That's why developing a crisis-ready culture is really, really important.
Wow. And I'd love to, I'll ask you this a bit later on because I want to get into a few topics that put this in context, but I'd love to know how easily or what's the success rate of actually trying to rectifying things if you catch it within 15 minutes. But I'll get to that a bit later on. Yeah. But let's chat a
So
bit.
just on the fifth, so just though, before we leave the 15 minutes, so if anybody's just come in the 15 minutes, it's how long you've got to respond and once in the public domain. So the implication of that is that you've got to have templates or some empowered. Anybody in your organization needs to be empowered, or at least more than the board, more than senior management team, to be able to act very, very fast. So it means change your way of thinking, change your protocols, change your processes, change your policies.
Gotcha. Now, this might be a simple question, or an obvious question, but how do we even know when we're in crisis?
That's a very, very good question. Let's think about what a crisis actually is, shall we?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's unpack that.
Yeah. So it basically is a moment in time, right? It is something has triggered the crisis. Okay, so let's take something big as an example at the moment. There is an explosion on an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico, BP, and oil is splashing all out into the Gulf of Mexico and people are dead, right? It's a triggering event. It's a single moment in time and it has to be big enough to stop the show, whatever the show is, right? Like the Grand Prix, the show was stopped in Melbourne last year. They weren't the first Grand Prix and they're not going to be the first Grand Prix this year in 2021. So it's a triggering event that stops the show. That's what a crisis is. And add to that the media spotlight, the glare of a floodlight, if you like, today is amplified on your organization. It will be on the victims and how quickly or not you've responded to the situation. So that's when you're in crisis. Your phone is pinging. The red lights are coming up on Twitter. Well, the proverbial red lights. There's things on Facebook. Here's an example. Sure. Qantas. You're Alan Joyce. You're the CEO of Qantas. You're in a taxi in Sydney. You're in the back seat, you have your mobile phone. Beside you is the head of investor relations. You've been to an investment meeting, and the share price is going, taking a dive. And Alan Joyce goes, "What the hell's going on?" And there was reports, unverified, unconfirmed reports, that a Qantas plane had crashed. Well, in fact, it hadn't, but bits of the Boeing engine had come apart. Rolls-Royce, who are in crisis all the time at the moment. Anyway, part of a Rolls-Royce engine, bits of the engine from the Qantas jet had fallen into Indonesia. So so that's a crisis. That's a show-stopping moment. The share price is taking a dive. Alan Joyce doesn't know what's going on. He's found out from his phone going off, and it took them a while to scramble and get information. That is typical of how a crisis can unfold today. And you hear the media going, well, this is what we know, unfolding events, breaking news.
Yeah. Stay tuned. We'll be back with more very soon.
So that you've got it's those first sort of 15 minutes, those first 24 hours are absolutely critical. Because you've literally got, well, I said 15 minutes, but if you stretch it to an hour, you're behind the story, as they say.
Yeah.
You've got to get ahead of the story. And the story doesn't have to be mainstream media. The story could be your local community at the cafe that's gossiping about you. It's
absolutely
where the story is. And here's a little tip: pick the panic.
Pick the panic. So explain that to us. What does that mean?
So a bit of the engine's fallen out of the sky for Qantas. It's landed in Indonesia. And Indonesians are tweeting about it. Who's going to panic? Which are your stakeholders are going to panic most? And where will the noise come from?
Right.
So if you pick the panic and anticipate the panic, you can get ahead of the story.
Gotcha.
But that's a little bit more difficult and challenging, Darren, if you haven't done that in advance. If you haven't maybe thought up of the top 3 or top 5 bad things that could happen to you that would cause a stop the show type event, then you're scrambling to get contact numbers, email addresses, mobile phone numbers, and you're losing precious time. So even having an up-to-date contact list and knowing who your VIPs are, i.e. people who have to get a phone call from the MD or the relationship manager or someone down the supply chain. Can you imagine what Qantas had to do, and panicking employees, the captain on the plane, he would have to, it's like, so there's a whole lot of things that get triggered. Actions get triggered.
Yep.
And good crisis planners match the actions with good communication.
Gotcha. And as you say, preparation in advance is key, because then at least you know, you have a roadmap for how to respond when something happens.
Absolutely. Even look, quite frankly, draw something on the back of a napkin in a restaurant if you have to.
Yeah.
I mean, at least have a page that, like you can grab and go, or it's laminated, or you've got a virtual, war room to go to that's password protected, where notes, you can do it in Trello. There's so many, good systems out there where you can track progress and everybody knows the handover. You don't have to do a handover at midnight. Personally, you can just go in and look on whatever virtual system you've set up to go in and find out what the last action was, because this is a 24/7 world.
Definitely. Wow, is it ever? So now, ritualistic sacrifice. What on earth does that mean?
Well, I'm sure many of us would know who Warren Buffett is, probably. Well, yes, an investment guru, one of the most successful investors in the world. So Warren Buffett has said there will always be blood in the floor in a crisis. So what does that mean? So let's think about the pandemic for a while. Let's think about the Victorian response to it. And we've had maybe 2 health ministers, I think, who've been sacrificed.
Yep.
Because somebody has to pay for what's happened.
Yeah.
Someone's going to be deemed to be responsible. So there's always a sacrifice. It is blood on the floor, ritualistic. It's scientifically proven. It's very well known in crisis management circles that someone's going to be given the flick. Dream world. Let's cast our mind back. What is it? 3 or 4 years ago, when that dreadful accident happened on the rapid something.
One of the
rides, and families, they were tragic, great tragedy when families lost, and it was horrible. Ultimately, Deborah Thomas, who actually I do know that the board, there was a lot of things that went on behind the scenes when only a few of us know about. Anyway, they were gagged pretty well and weren't able to do anything. They were not taking the advice of their very good PR people, an agency. So she ultimately got sacked. Well, she left the organisation, and that's another example of what ritualistic sacrifice is.
Gotcha. But it doesn't always have to go that far.
No. Oh, no. I mean, if you look, most crises are predictable. Well, of course, Mother Nature comes and let's put, natural causes out of it. But most reputation risk comes from bad behaviour. And I'm sad to say, like a bad boy's behaving badly, because there's many more of them at the top. So, sadly, it's just a statistic, right?
Yeah. And that's because ego and power gets in the way, and we all know the repercussions of that.
And behaviour, and if organisations have failed to keep up with the social licence to operate, then, remarks about our First Nation people, any Indigenous really, or people with disabilities, or women, and still those remarks, it's the behaviour that can trigger something. It's typically what happens.
Yeah, wow. And so now going back to my earlier question, if we really are well prepared and we act within 15 minutes, how well can we really turn this around and step out in front of it?
That's the idea. Get ahead of the story. And it's a long time ago, but I think it's worth remembering. There was 2. One of them I'm going to talk about in Sydney. Shell had an oil spill in Sydney Harbour.
Wow, yep.
It happened late. I think it was 8 or 9 o'clock at night. The news was broken on television. And the night watchman held the first media conference. The night watchman. So that's that. So let's stop right there. There's a lesson in educating and empowering the front line. Where are your vulnerable sites? And if the worst case happened, i.e. big oil spill in the Sydney Harbour, who's going to front the media? Well, at 10 o'clock at night, it's going to be whoever's on duty.
Yeah.
So very sensibly, they educate and empower their front line.
Yep.
And have always. And they've had a 20-minute rule actually in their organisation for a very long time. Yeah. So the next morning they're ahead of the story. So then it moves in the second stage, because that's the second stage. After something's happened, the news is out. Then they stepped in ahead of the story with very, very good communication. It is an absolute lesson in how to do it. Right. And they had allies coming out of the woodworks. The then Premier, I think it was, the Premier then was Bob Carr. Yep. And he came out and said, we need a working harbour. Yes, this is unfortunate. Yes, it's tragic. We'll work with work with Shell to clean it up, but we need a working harbour. Yeah. And so their friends came out. So that was a good case. And of course, one of the most famous of all is Johnson & Johnson back in the mid-80s with the Tylenol being poisoned.
Oh.
And their responses gained textbook, very fast turnaround. Then, because we didn't have Twitter back in the mid-80s, we barely had mobile phones and computers. I don't know. So they had more time. But nonetheless, they acted very fast and got their story out very quickly.
Yeah. And in the movies and in series I watch, they always say, let's control the narrative. That's what that is, basically?
Yeah, well, I don't think you can control anything, actually. I can barely control what I have for breakfast. So, but what we can do is manage.
Yeah.
You know, you can manage the narrative, and it's less is more. So it's really important we give people a way of thinking about the crisis, i.e., is it tragic? Is it unbearable? Is it, I never say unfortunate because no one believes you.
Yeah.
Or it's disappointing. You know, we're as disappointed as everyone else is about what happened today in Sydney Harbour. We thought we had a watertight plan and that everything was okay in the ships. Clearly something badly went wrong, and let me reassure you, we're doing everything we can to fix this as fast as possible. Please be patient with us.
Great. Yep, absolutely. And so, Janie, I'd love to know a little bit more about how you work. Tell us a bit about how you work and exactly what you do with all that experience in the media.
Do you know what? Sometimes I think back, I was a little girl from country New South Wales up in the northwest where we were over 100 kilometres from our nearest town, and I didn't even go to school until I was 11. I did correspondence school.
Oh, really?
I was shy. Yep.
Wow.
I was shy.
Who would have thought? No way.
Who would have thought? And here I am being privileged and blessed and honoured to work with some amazing people on a global scale. So I went from a shy little country girl at boarding school to being a journalist, which I always wanted to do. And then I went into in-house corporate communication. And I learned a lot about how to deal with the crisis because I remember getting a phone call. So I'm young, very young. But nonetheless, I'm the publicity officer, and the company I was working to had decided to put up their prices, but nobody bothered to tell me.
Right.
Nobody bothered to tell me. So I get phone calls from journalists going, so how long is it since you've decided to print money? What? So I was, I don't know, in my 20s, but I knew a lot of the agricultural journalists. I was working in an agribusiness company. They trusted me and liked me. And I went, well, Peter, let me find out what's going on and get back to you. So I learned very early that you could be caught off guard when you aren't in the C-suite, you know. So I had to work very hard, and I'm a young woman, right? I'm working in a man's world, you know, mostly male-dominated field. I had to work hard and be very educated as much as I possibly could, so I could speak the language of the C-suite. I could speak the language of the men, and they could learn to trust me, and they would tell me information and know I wasn't going to leak it or share it. So I learned very early. And then when I had my PR consultancy, I just like to, I don't know, it must be from my late father, you know, integrity and doing the right thing, that I was always very interested in the serious side of PR, not publicity, publicists, flitting around, whatever, but actually looking at reputational risk and looking at organisations and helping them understand how the media might report a crisis, helping them understand where their risks were and picking, what's coming over the hill to bite you or potentially help you. So I've been, playing and working around in the issues management, which is, doing something and communicating about it, not sweeping it under the carpet before the crisis hits. So, and then when I had my second company, which was a media training company, we did a lot of work in the lead up to the Sydney Olympics. And I was very privileged to be working with the second major venue at Darling Harbour.
Oh, wow.
And so we did a 2-year program with all the little sovereign states, as I call them, all the individual businesses in Darling Harbour to help them prepare. So they understood their responsibilities to their landholder and to the overall image of the Sydney Olympics.
Wow.
So I worked with a lot of business continuity people. I worked...
people, actors?
No, yes. Well, I don't know how, but this is a funny little anecdote for you. Imagine this, there is a shack. It literally was like a shack. It was near the out sort of Everleigh, Redfern Way. There was where it was the SES headquarters, from memory. And I'm sitting there with the brass, literally, Darren, the brass. Everyone in that room except for Sir Humphrey, the bureaucrat from Premiers and Cabinet, who was in his literally pinstripe suit, literally the caricature of Sir Humphrey. And the rest are all braided. They're all police, they're all, senior emergency services people, and me, only woman in the room.
Wow.
And we are asked to evaluate the crisis management plans of all the key infrastructure companies associated with the Olympics. Right?
Wow.
Like telecommunications, water, utilities, you name it, right? And we got to this particular crisis management plan, and the boys, the men, we're sort of shaking their brass around and going, oh yeah, this is fine, this looks good. And now here comes that C word again, courage. And I looked at it and I went, there is nothing in my bones, my integrity. My father must have been on my shoulder saying, you cannot possibly approve this. And I took a bit of a deep breath and went, I respectfully disagree, gentlemen.
Wow.
This plan is completely inadequate. There is nothing in here that would convince me they would know how to deal with that crisis if it struck them, and we'd be in trouble.
Oh, fantastic.
And the room went absolutely silent. And then the Sir Humphrey character piped up and he said, I completely agree with Jane. Send it back. It has to be redone and we need to make sure they know what they're doing.
I love it. I love it. And so you work obviously with a lot of organizations, with government bodies, but also individuals with personal brands.
Yes. I mean, like a personal brand like Alan Joyce, CEO of Qantas, when the same-sex marriage debate was happening, he took a very active stance in his role, not as an individual citizen per se, but you can't really divorce those things today if you've got a high profile like Alan Joyce, and he spoke out in favour of it. Now, he was criticised. I got a lot of flack, but I actually admire his courage. And survey, like the Edelman Trust Barometer, any of the big surveys that look at reputation risk, look at trust, probably for the last 2 or 3 years, have shown that the millennial workforce in particular, but not only, absolutely want and expect, not only want, but expect their organisations and their CEO to take a stance and speak out. And that actually makes you an attractive company to work for.
Yeah, so true. So true. It's a different philosophy, a different mentality now with the next generation, isn't it?
Oh, completely. Yes, they expect it. They want authenticity. They want to see the whites of your eyes and trust you.
Yeah. Trust,
and
I like that.
Trust. And then you look at Atlassian with Michael Cannon-Brookes. Atlassian are completely transparent. You can go online and all their policies, everything is out there for anyone to see. Now, that's a modern organisation. Now, I understand how you prepare, you've got, match culture, but you've got to tweak it and know that today it's speed, it's not the drug, but it's speed is everything. Speed really, really, really matters, and perception is everything.
Definitely. I mean, in this modern day, as you mentioned, it's 24/7 social media, magazines, books, movie, TV stations, radio stations. It's just, we're bombarded.
Absolutely. And if you've been a bad boy behaving badly, like, and they were all men, who are leading the BP, they all tried to blame each other, and BP got absolutely cast for that. You end up as a movie.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The
deep turns into a movie plot.
It did, and it became a movie.
Yeah.
You could also expect, if there's a Royal Commission, your crisis management plan is going to end up as evidence.
Yeah, that's true too. Wow.
So there's a lot to think about, but but it's just taking a simple step of going, do you know what really works? Preparing, thinking of the bad things that can happen to you. Organizations, employees love to plot and plan. They are, if you get a cross section of your organization, even if you're an organization of 20, just take a little bit of a representation of them and have a brainstorm. And let me tell you, they will come up with all the things that could go wrong in your organization, and they will delight in doing it. And whilst, so you can make it fun. Yes, it can be shit scary if it happens to you without a plan. It is absolutely that. But you can just take some very simple steps. So one, get together a little horizontal cross section of your organization, give them a brief and say, think of all the bad things that could happen to our organization and who would need to know about that, who would criticize us, who would support us, help, hinder. And you've got a basic plan. Then you go, okay, do we have the contact list? Do we have their up-to-date emails? Do we have what's their Facebook page? What are the handles? What are the passwords? You just get the basics, and you've got a couple of pages done.
I suppose just like you have an occupational health and safety plan, just like you have a fire drill, you need to have one for crisis as well.
Yes, and to think if a fire, because they will report, there are unconfirmed rumours or unconfirmed reports of a fire in factory XYZ, and then your suppliers going to hear, your employees, your partners, your children. You just think through. It is actually quite a simple thing to do and can be fun. And let me tell you, it will save you lives and save you money. Here's the golden rule: for every $1 you spend on preparation, you'll save 9 in response.
Wow, I love that. Every $1 you spend on preparation, you save 9 in response. I love that.
So let's say you spend 10,000, you're going to potentially save 90,000. You spend 100,000, you're potentially saving awfully close to $1 million.
Wow, and that's not even including the mental energy you spend.
Absolutely. And then you've got people who have post-traumatic stress syndrome, if they're not properly debriefed. There's hidden costs because of the impact that it has on people at the front line. There's debriefing, counselling, all of those sorts of things. And again, if there's a small organisation thinking about this, going, okay, do we have a psychologist we could call? Is anybody, do we just want to have them, we'll bring in a couple of people, let's have a chat with them. We may never use them, but at least they know a bit about us, we know a bit about them, and we can call them in if necessary.
Perfect. I love it. Yep. As you say, just being fully prepared and organised is already 90% of the battle.
It is. Yep. It is. And then if you're really serious, you get people in like me who put you through your paces. Yeah. Do a bit of an audit of your plan and just might find something, might not, might just go tick, yep, you're ready. Or a bit of tweaking here and there. Let's do a little bit of a desktop exercise and test it and validate it. Or you really got a big issue here. You need to have your key spokespeople trained, stress tested.
Yep. Wow.
Because let me tell you, strange things can happen when you stress test people in media training. I've had we picked this. We're launching. This is going back in my PR career. We were launching this big controversial animal health product, and we'd chosen the vet, the in-house company vet, because he was good looking, he was articulate. anyway, we put him through his paces in training. First interview, he sailed through. We all going, oh yes, I'll be clever.
Fantastic.
Second interview got very difficult because if he was going to be the spokesperson, he had to be tested and validated. He took personal offence, jumped out of his chair, and went to literally give, wanted to get into a fist fight. He wanted to knock.
Oh my God.
He wanted to knock the journalist out.
Oh my God.
And if the journalist and the cameraman hadn't moved back in a hurry, he would have,
Wow.
Yeah. So needless to say, he got scrapped.
Definitely. I bet they weren't expecting that.
No, none of us were. I mean, none of us were. And it was just like, oh my God, what just happened?
Oh my God. And so what do you love? What are you so passionate about with respect to what you do? Because you are extremely passionate about what you do. What is it that really makes you, makes you tick?
I passionately believe that powerful communication, powerful strategic, deliberate communication is the cornerstone of all great leadership.
I love that.
And the more that I can do to, debunk the myths about the media, the more that I can actually be of service and actually go behind the scenes and go, this is what can happen.
Yeah.
Because it's all very predictable. There are 4 stages and it unfolds. Even with the social media, it just goes faster and faster and faster. But there are very typical stages, the media report a crisis. There are always the same questions asked at every single stage, always. So why wouldn't I share that information?
Yep.
Why wouldn't I package it up and put it into programs and put it into, very easy bite-sized bits that can help organisations so that lives are saved, reputations are intact.
I love it. Yeah. And as you say, leadership is so important these days more than ever before. So, grooming good leaders is such an important thing.
Absolutely. And I love working with emerging leaders.
Yeah.
Before they've got bad habits. But you know what? If they've got bad habits, it's just going to take a lot longer. It's a bit like, learning to swim differently or, having a better tennis serve or that golf. I don't play golf, but, people spend a lot of money with golf pros.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. You go backwards and people get frustrated before they go forward. But it's like anything, it just takes time.
Love it. Well, and Janie, tell us a bit about your book. How can we find your book? And
tell us
a bit more about it.
Yeah, the book is 10 years old now.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. But the principles never change. Take responsibility, act fast, be authentic, have empathy, and know when it's a crisis as opposed to a bit of bad publicity. Yep. So the principles that are in my book and how to do a really good media interview in my book, the 4 highly effective stages of crisis management, but updating it now with case studies that are more relevant, more about the social media, what to anticipate, how Twitter works as opposed to how Facebook works. Facebook is like a big street party, really. Twitter is like a big megaphone.
I love it. What about LinkedIn?
You know what? People think that LinkedIn doesn't matter, but it does.
Oh, yeah.
Because, it's a B2B network and it's where reputations are made or broken, really.
Big time. They say LinkedIn is becoming more and more like Facebook these days.
Yes, I agree with you. And people like me write up case studies and share them on Twitter. So that always amazes some of my clients and organizations that they could end up as a case study somewhere. It terrifies them.
Yeah.
It's actually an incentive to get a plan together. Otherwise, somebody like me is going to write about you badly.
Oh boy.
Like I'm going to be writing about Eddie McGuire, so by the time this podcast goes live, it would have been out there. But if people want to follow me or get tips, they can go to my website and subscribe to my newsletter because it's very practical. I share latest trends, latest research. I look at, I unpack a crisis or I share other people's views. on how to become more self-aware as a leader, because the more self-aware you are,
Beautiful.
the better you will lead in a crisis.
Definitely. And as I always say, like, self-awareness is a superpower.
It is a superpower.
It is a superpower. And it's not easy to cultivate, but we all have to do it. Yep.
Absolutely. The more self-aware, the better, really. And because you know what the statistics tell us? That 90% of us think we're self-aware.
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.
And you know what the actual statistic is?
50%?
No, 10 to 15.
Oh, my God. Oh, God, that's crazy.
I know. So we've got a long way to go.
A lot of work to do.
Yes, that's right.
Well done. Well, Janie, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. A fascinating topic, and you are extremely passionate about what you do. So I'm also going to put the links to your website, your newsletter, your book, and any other ways people can find you.
LinkedIn.
And LinkedIn, of course. Absolutely. Yes. And LinkedIn as well. Is there anything else that you want to leave us with before we finish up?
Well, I would say do whatever you can right now to go, are we prepared if the really worst thing happens? If not, start your reputational risk planning now.
Got it. Get out a piece of paper, get out a napkin, wherever you are, get a pen, put something together.
That's right. And and let me tell you, your employers will have great fun with you brainstorming. Just, take an hour, make it part of what you do rather than make it scary and something separate. Make it part of what you do every day. And the world will be a better place if we're more crisis ready and more crisis aware.
Oh, love it. What a perfect way to end the podcast. Janie, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. All the audience out there, I hope you enjoyed it as much as I have. We'll see you very, very soon for another episode of Playing with Perspective. And just a little plug, if anybody likes what we do, please send us a review on YouTube or on Podbean or on Apple. That's what helps us keep the show together. So thanks, everybody. Have a great one. Janie, thank you again.
My pleasure.
And we'll see everybody very, very soon. Bye for now.